everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are now live for our first panel event for SEXtember. For everyone who's here, thank you so much for joining us on a Tuesday evening. I hope you've got your cup of tea, your cup of coffee, your hot chocolate. You've got your hoodies and blankets, your pets, your friends, everyone to have this conversation with us. It's a lovely rainy evening, so where else would you be if not with us? So thank you so much for joining us on this panel called International Relationships, What Goes On Behind Closed Doors. As everything that we do start, it's really important that we do acknowledge the traditional custodians of the different lands on which we're gathered here today. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation of the land on which I'm gathered here today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I invite you to drop in a note in the chat and let us know what lands you are joining us from today and recognize their ongoing work in this space. Having said that, so Zoom's got this really fun feature called Q&As. You can ask us questions. It's absolutely anonymous. So if you want to get very, very curious, if you want to get very exciting, ask us away. I'm sure our panelists will have some fun with those questions. So definitely pop your questions in there and we'll try and answer them during this panel. Having said that, a fantastic event like SEXtember would not be possible without our sponsors. So we want to thank Frenchie, our platinum sponsor, for this event. We really appreciate the support that you've given us. And we'd like to invite you all to check out Frenchie's website as part of SEXtember. And all of their links are in the chat. So our lovely team will let you know what links you can follow and definitely have a look at these websites. Having said that, if you are attending today's panel, the fun stuff is you get a $10 voucher free to explore with Frenchie. So who doesn't love a good voucher when you're staying in? So absolutely check them out and stick around until the end to receive that. Having said that, as always, a few housekeeping things. We'll ask you a lot of questions. We just ask that you stay mute. Put all your questions in the Q&A. If at any point you do have any other things that you want to add, feel free to go ham in the chat box. So thank you so much for joining us. But let's get to the fun part. I'll kick things off. I've been speaking for a while now, so you should know who I am by now. I'm Nyonika. I am your host for this evening. I've been involved in this space for a while now, and I'm joined by 4 fantastic speakers. They've all got different experiences. I'll let them introduce themselves. My pronouns are she and they. So it's absolutely lovely to be joining you all today. So Sita, do you want to kick things off?
Yep. Thanks, Nate. Hey, everyone. I'm Sifu, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm currently in my 3rd year studying medicine at UNSW. And I've been involved in the sexual health space for quite a while as well, mainly because I just know that international students are not really familiar with the space, and I just wanted to kind of change that and help promote it. I'll pass it on to Sujit.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sujith. Just finished my PhD. I've been involved in diversity, inclusion, and sexual health for about 10 years, somewhere thereabouts. Yeah, really looking forward to seeing what's going to happen.
Sylvester, do you want to kick things off next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Good day, everyone. I am Sylvester, a student at the Center for Social Research and Health. I have interest in this space because it is my area of research, and it has been a wonderful experience working around here, with international students, especially those from my background or from a background that looks like my background, that is contexts that have conservative sexual norms. So it's a good experience to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Rose, how about you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. It's a blessing and an honor to be here. My name is Rose. I'm a 5th year medical student at UNSW. I've been very fortunate to be part of the Untold Story program. If you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend. And that's how I got involved with this, webinar. And my main reason why I'm here today is because I really want people to have an understanding and more talk about the importance of sex education and also being communicative and honest about your sexuality with other people, and also the difficulties of being in Australia as an international student and navigating the barriers of that. And again, thank you for being here today. And I'm very excited with the other panelists to answer all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. That's a very positive start. And as you can tell, all our speakers bring a lot of lived experiences and different background experiences as well. We've got two fantastic researchers, Sujit and Sylvester, and we've got Sithu and Rose, who bring a lot of that medical student, but also a lot of the young lived experience as well. So I think we've got a good split in age and perspectives as well, and I'd love to make the most out of that. As you can tell from our entire event discussion, which is international relationships, what happens behind closed doors, I'd love to give everyone a bit of context. And we're discussing this in the sense that what happens behind closed doors is because as international students, we all have different understandings and perceptions of sexual relationships, sexual health, reproductive health as well. Sometimes we might be underprepared. Sometimes we might be just rightly equipped with the knowledge that we need. And I think this is a very good space and a safe space for us to sort of discover things that we should know, that we have known, and what we do with the knowledge that we develop. This discussion is to discuss what goes on behind closed doors. How do you learn about sex? How do you learn about dating and relationships? What happens when you date for the first time after moving to a country like Australia? How do you deal with the confusion about different dating rules and expectations? And the whole idea of this discussion is to learn about every new experience that we've had with a panel of speakers who are very, experienced, but also very lovely for being here and sharing their experiences with us. As an international student, we all have different experience. I think what we're trying to do is curate all of your different insights as well together. Having said that, let's jump into the saucier, juicier bits, which is the actual discussion. The whole concept of behind closed doors is quite broad. It's quite different as well. All of us have different experiences when we land. Sithu, my first question is to you. Why do you think we discuss things in the context, or how do you think the context of closed doors or behind closed doors applies to us? What's your understanding of what you first knew about sexual education when you first came here? And how's that changed briefly?
So I mainly think that because international students, when we first get to Australia, are very shy, and we mainly come from very conservative backgrounds. For me as well, coming from Burma, we had no kind of sexual education at all in high school or in middle school at all. And coming here, it's the first time that we hear about people openly talk about sex and openly talk about sexual health. So we're mainly shy, and we mainly don't really take part in these conversations, and that's mainly why a lot of the stuff happens behind closed doors. And also because when we try to talk about these things, we don't want the judgment from the people that we know, the judgment from our friends, and also from our families as well, because it's very common in, at least in my culture, that people don't have sex at all, before marriage, and that it should only happen after marriage, and that with one person. And when people want to explore, but they don't want the judgment, so it leads to people not talking about it and things happening close door, behind the doors.
Absolutely, thank you. Sujit, I'd love your perspective on this. I'm sure the slightly older, mature population here has a different perspective on these things, having had a bit of an experience. What is your take?
Not that old. And also, I realized my microphone wasn't switched off the entire time, so if there were any odd sounds, please forgive me. Sorry. So your question was from someone who's been engaged in this space for a longer time. What have I noticed since I've been in Australia? Correct? Yeah. So I came to Sydney in 2017 from Singapore to work on my PhD, which looks at sexuality, ethnicity, and belonging amongst young queer Australians. And I've done quite a bit of my time there. So I spoken with students from UNSW and community partners and various other places, people from all walks of life. But when I first came here, I noticed that a lot of these postgrads were from Asia. So it made it difficult to be myself. And I was so used to being able to talk about all these different issues and so on. But then because they were international students who were pretty conservative, it was hard for me to do that. I also saw a lot of the younger students making mistakes that I had made in the past, and felt quite helpless about how I could support them. Because for many of us, moving away from home presented our first opportunities to live out our fantasies, right? Fantasies of being loved, understood, taken seriously. Many of them jump at the chance of getting into relationships, as we did when we went to college or lived away from home for the first time. There's this rush from finally achieving something you've dreamed about for so long, and they think, oh my goodness, this is what love is. I must do whatever I can to make this relationship work. And they often get stuck in toxic situations and assume that it's normal, and that's what all the love songs keep going on about, right? And so they focus on that relationship to the exclusion of all else. Don't invest the time in making friends, and don't challenge themselves in new interests. You try and take on so much risk, and they don't feel like they can have honest conversations with their partners, or like they can refuse. They take sexual risks, make questionable financial decisions, disrespect their own preferences just to make their partners happy, or to not attract shame from other international students. And because they don't really know anyone or anything outside of that relationship, since they haven't built a network, once they're in trouble, they don't really have allies to fall back on. I mean, how can we get help when help feels like such a shameful four-letter word when applied to yourself? There's so much shame and fear and anxiety and confusion, and all of it can feel quite suffocating. Knowing where to go, even if it's a simple, trustworthy resource you can check out at your own time. I found that really made a difference to younger people, because they wouldn't want to talk about it, but if you give them a place you can go to, they'd be like, okay, I could look at this at my own time, at a safe space. And that could help with a difficult situation versus suffering in silence and letting everyone and everything you've worked so hard for, and that brought you to Australia, letting all those dreams crumble because you don't know where to go, or because of this sense of shame. So once we start on that long journey of making sense, we grow to realize that our experiences and tools can empower us, and accessing timely and accurate information can help guide us in the right direction. And from my conversations with lots of young people who've just moved here, they don't have the background, the tools to be able to have any of these conversations, not because they're stupid. They're very intelligent, and they have sex education back in many of these countries, right? But it's just that there are many other tricky cultural things that they have to navigate before they can make that step.
Yeah. No, I absolutely hear you. And I think it's definitely not something that's a one size fits all, or like linear, application of sex ed is taught and you understand that there's power dynamics, there's cultural differences, there's, ethnic and like gender group differences that come into play. Even expectations around hookup culture. A lot of these things make a huge difference. And we'll explore that more. We'll sort of pull apart what hookup culture is, what everyone's understanding or experiences with that. But Rose, my question is to you. So just discussed a lot of those cultural nitty-gritties. But when you first came to Australia, what was the first feeling that you had? Hearing all of this terminology about sex and people hooking up and dating and relationships being thrown at you. What was your first experience?
Thank you for that question, A. So I think personally for me, I was very fortunate since I went to international school from where I'm from in Vietnam. So I felt like with the big terminology, the language barrier compared to other students, it was not the biggest challenge or barrier for me. I would say that when I first came as a high school student, I had a lot more guidance and support, especially when I was still living in a boarding house, and I had a lot of conversations with the teachers, and we also had sex ed classes in high school. So I guess fortunately for me, I did not have a lot of, confusions about, or the words about what was happening. But I think it was more of a cultural attitude difference. Where for me, it was something that I just sort of accepted that this is what people do here, and it's normal and it's healthy, and they're being safe. But I think one of the things that I would have loved to learn more about when I first came over here was, learning about how to, it sounds weird, but how to negotiate sex. Because having sex is like a consensual process. So hence I feel like I would have appreciated a lot more if I could learn more about that in the curriculum school program.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting, Sujit mentioned this as well, that a lot of these countries do give you the opportunity to have sex education. But as you said, you've been one of those privileged people who has had sex education, but you have a lot of those differences, which is, what do you make out of that education? How do you balance those cultural differences? And I think this ties into what Sylvester said earlier on quite well, which is, you come from a sexually conservative background that doesn't discuss these things liberally. However, it is also interesting that, your research is in this space. So I'm conscious that there might be a lot of resistance, or your journey might not have been the easiest when going about researching this. I'm curious about your context. When you moved here to do this research or complete your PhD, what was your experience? How did you feel about, people talking about sex so liberally, given the conservative background and context?
Thank you. If I don't have much, if I didn't say much, it would be because all the panelists have said almost everything I have to say. So I wouldn't want to repeat everything over, but I'll try to be as brief as I could. The line remains that people from conservative cultures like me, no matter how well equipped you are, coming to a new setting where things are entirely different from what you used to know, even more different than you used to see in Western movies, it is always a bit tricky and difficult to move around that space. And so there is always that issue of feeling judged, feeling of shame, because we grew up learning that talking about sex is a taboo. These are things you should not say. And then you are in a setting where it's like the norm. So it is very complex. From what my research has shown, from what literature has shown, it's like a two-way thing. For some, it's sort of restrictive, like they don't want to go into that space because they feel they are handicapped in a sense. And for some, it is an opportunity to explore any explorable, especially if you've not had that chance back home. So it is a very complex issue. And then that is why I am so happy. Maybe I wouldn't have gone into this area of research if the International Student Health Hub was available before I came to Australia. And so I am so much in love with that initiative. It is not a cure-all, but as I've always said, you can't build anything on nothing. So you have something and you refine that thing. And then that is what I think that space, it will be a strong space for us, those of us that feel shy discussing sexual issues, to have our questions answered in a safe and correct and accurate source.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think you've captured that very beautifully, having said that all of us go through different cycles of emotions. Sithu has explored that. Sujit has also touched on that, having said that curiosity comes through very strongly. And we've all been there. As first year students, you've got freedom at your feet. You've got responsibilities, but you don't have your parents or your family looming over you. You don't know friends or people who know you really well or have known you their entire lives, just standing over your shoulder. So you have a lot of scope in terms of exploration. And you get quite curious. And as Sujit suggested, sometimes you make those mistakes. And as Rose addressed, that even if you have the information, you're still quite confused. And confusion seems to be a big theme. And as Sylvester said, that guilt and shame often sparks a lot of that confusion as well. I have a question for the panelists. what was the thing you were most confused about in like a line when you first moved here? Sujit, you have a big grin. I'll start with you.
I haven't been what, sorry?
You have a big grin. You're very cute.
No, I'm always smiling. I'll try to slow down this time. I tend to just, it's the queerness in me just like bursting out. It always happens. So your question was, what surprised me, was it?
Yeah. What were you most confused about when you first moved here?
So I was very surprised by how, despite having all this education in the past, I kept thinking, how do I navigate this health system, right? So not just for the people who came to me for advice, like, hey, like something happened, I need to see someone to get a blood test or for HIV scare or so on and so forth, but I didn't have any of the answers. For me personally, I didn't know where I could go get like a vaccine for a lower cost. Would it be covered under my student insurance? I didn't know what my overseas student health cover covered. So it was just a whole lot of me just, okay, let's Google and hope that the information I find is updated. Many times, not so. So it was just a confused mess of things for me. I had never been this confused ever. So it was a slap to my face, actually, especially since I was supposed to be this, someone who's familiar with sexual health, health seeking and so on.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sita, what were you most confused about?
Similar with Sujit and like, how does this all work? Like in terms of sexual health, when should I get tested? And also with the hookup culture as well, and the dating culture, what apps to use? Am I using the right apps? And the hookup culture is very big here as well. And also, especially in colleges, because there's a lot of stuff happening. And also just the idea of like people in the same group, friend group, just hooking up. And this is really shocking as well. And yeah.
Interesting. There's a lot of conversations to be had about that. Sylvester, what was shocking to you?
I think one thing I should say that was most shocking is the ideas that some international students have about sex in Australia, about infections. Some people believe that this is a developed country, a Western country, where it is almost impossible to contract infections. It was really, really surprising to me.
Wow, that is interesting. Based on the knowledge Sujit and Sylvester have shared, get tested. Sito said this as well. We'll give you more information how to do that. But before we do, I'll jump towards Rose and ask her, what were you most shocked and confused about?
It was confused. I think the answer to that would be why sex ed in Australia is still so not fully developed and still not fully serving the needs and demands of young adults. So for example, the age of consent in Australia is 16. I remember when I was in year 12, I was in a sex ed class about condoms and how it works. And I'm like, this is really late. They will probably already start having sex 2 years ago. And because I was a nerd, with full disclosure, I would prefer to study for my exams than be stuck in a classroom for an hour for things that I already had to figure out behind closed doors by myself. So I was confused why it took so long. I didn't know whether they were taught by us in year 9, year 10 when I wasn't there. But I was just so confused why there was a more proactive approach and more knowledge base given to high schools about something that was very important and everyone was going through at that time. I think what I was most shocked about, I actually did a presentation on sex education in Australia in year 12, and I found an article. This was when I graduated, 2016. So as recent as 5 years ago, there was still high schools in Australia that was teaching and advocating for abstinence as a way to avoid STIs. And one of the sessions, they were comparing girls' vaginas to use tape if they had repeated sex with people. So it was important to maintain their virginity, so then their vagina does not become floppy like used tape. And that was very, very shocking to me.
Wow, that is shocking. For everyone who's watching this, abstinence means not to engage in any sexual activities. But having said that, these shocking conversations and revelations all of you have had are quite scary because Sylvester, jump on, go for it.
Thank you. I think I want to react to that. What we advocate is a comprehensive sex education. And a comprehensive sex education takes into cognizance everybody's choice, including those that want to abstain. So sexuality education that is devoid of abstinence or that is devoid of contraception or STI protection resources and methods is incomplete. And then research has shown that they are always not very effective. So it's always a complete message. If you want to abstain, you can abstain, and it doesn't make you less human. If you want to be sexually active, you can be sexually active. It also doesn't make you less human. So I think that is just what my reaction will be to that.
Thank you. And some very important messages being shared there about sex ed. And I think it's important that we have these conversations earlier on. And thank you, all of you, for sharing those, shocking experiences. Having said that, you no longer have to be shocked behind closed doors and be confused. We have a fantastic New South Wales Health International Student Hub. It provides you information on different, sexual health terms, different experiences as well. It tells you how you can get tested, where you can seek support, both emotional and physical support for your sexual health and reproductive health. So you are not alone. What we do want to remind you through this panel is we've all had different experiences, but you are not alone. And we're going to try and unlearn all of those different experiences to make sure that you are safe and you're protected and you move towards safer sexual practices. So we've got the link there in the chat. The lovely Maddie Stratton from the Health Hub has popped it in. So big shout out to her and her team for putting that up. So definitely check the website out if you ever have any questions. But what's a good conversation without the juicy bits? We all need to learn from experience. Moving on to the discussion that we're having, which is, sex ed looks different. There's different things that you can do to protect yourself. But there's also a lot that you don't know. Before you get to the point of discussion whether how to get tested, I actually need to get tested. Wait, testing is a thing? I think there's 3 stages that all of us go through. It all starts from, I've moved to Australia. I like this person. I want to go on a date. I think I might want to, have some sort of sexual relations with this person. That's the stage you go before that. And everyone sort of discussed this in different ways. That dating stage looks very different for international students. And everyone has very different experiences. The fun fact is we also have someone who's married on the panel. So their experiences are also going to be very different. Going through what those differences back in their home country are and here are, it's a very interesting conversation to have. So Rose, I'll kick off with you. What were your sort of, dating experiences? How did you navigate that space? And how did that lead you to get into this space?
Thank you for that question. It's a very important question. I think it's a process that each individual has to go through. So I would say with dating, I started at when I had my first boyfriend when I was 16. I think for me personally, it was more that I wanted someone that I can talk to, being like an international student in a foreign country. So I would say I'm not sure about everyone, but my first relationship was more of a dependency when I was trying to establish and I have a support network and friends. Whether or not it was the best or the most healthy one, I'm not sure. But I would say that I have learned a lot about, dating experiences. I think the best the best way you can learn is through experience. You learn things the hard way. Or I guess some advice I would give is to be honest with yourself. I would say don't try to compromise your values or your principles just because you like that person, but also don't hide yourself either, because if you don't know and communicate your values, then the other person wouldn't know either. And if the other person does not respect or listen, then perhaps they're not worth your time at the beginning. I've been very fortunate to have very, I guess, supportive and I guess open communication and mutual respect from my previous, I guess, boyfriends. And I would say also been very fortunate to find my current partner not through dating apps, because I know why, but dating apps like scare me so much. Like, it really freaks me out. I good luck to all of you who's on it. I applaud you. I cannot do it. I don't know why. But I heard lots of dating app stories, which both bring me joy, but also feel really sorry for the other person. So good luck to all of you.
Thank you. Caesar, the next question is for you. Is there any difference in how you'd approach dating or relationships, or, the sexual relation space from how you would back home and here? Is there a massive difference? And what are those differences you've experienced?
Yeah, dating here is very casual, and that back home, when you like someone, it usually starts with "I love you" back in Burma, and you just start a relationship from there. There's no kind of like courting or dating before starting a relationship, which I was not fond of. It was just, I don't know what love is. I don't know that I can't say that to you. That's just the start from the first time that I meet you, just because I like you. But here it's very casual. Even if you are seeing someone on the side, you could be dating another person, dating as in like going on dates, not dating, going on dates with different people. And also, yeah, that's the main difference, I guess. Yeah, and that it's very casual, and that there's a lot of casual sex and casual sex and like hookups happening here a lot more than back home as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hearing a lot of the casual realm of things happens a lot. So sex, relationships, emotional connections. Sylvester, this is obviously very different from, you being married. So I'd love to hear about what your experience with this is. I'm sure all of our audience members are very curious as well. So I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. I think I will take it up from where Sifu stopped, or what he said. As I said earlier, there seems to be a line for every one of us that come from a conservative sexual culture. Back home, you have to be in love, and then you have sex. But here, it seems you have to have sex and then see if you can be in love. So it is sort of complex. But the truth is, it is somehow in that people get to lie to people when they do not actually are in love with them. For instance, because you want to get down with someone, you can say anything you want to say. It's a usual thing. And then when you do, you take a walk. Then in a setting like this, where you don't need a committed relationship to have sex, it seems to be a lot more easier. And then I think one blind spot is where I come from. If you ask a lady out, because our relationship seems to be very heteronormative, like male-female relationship. If you ask a lady out and the lady says yes in the first month or first 2 months or first 3 months, then the idea is that she's loose. So you have to keep presenting your manifesto, giving her gifts, it could take you 1 or 2 years, you are doing the right thing. But here, if you ask someone out and the person says no, if you press on, it becomes harassment. And then if you are coming with the idea that you have back home that it is not right for her to say no at the first go, so you will actually be treading the path of sexual harassment innocently without knowing. So, and that is why I think discussions like this are very important, so that people will understand that the setting is not what it used to be back home in terms of consent, in terms of entering a relationship. If someone tells you no, the person might mean no, and not like where I come from, when the person actually means yes when she says no. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's, a lot of interesting elements that we have to explore here as international students, because we've all probably experienced that. One, Rose has addressed that she's never used dating apps. Sito has briefly mentioned that dating apps are very confusing figuring it out. Sylvester has addressed that, body language and cultural communication is different. And I'm sure we also have a lot of, racial elements at play as to how that defines approach, how that defines, capacity to date, or even the way you're perceived, or even responses and liking. So I'm sure there's a lot of those conversations going on, and I think it's important that we have them today, because these are experiences that we have all had in some sense. And it's important to remind people that a lot of these things are cultural context. These aren't reflective of your individual capacity or character as an international student. And I think an important message that we can take away so far is that Sylvester's addressed this: whatever you choose to do on the spectrum, which is either engage or not engage at all in any sexual activity, it's fine. It's your choice as long as it's consensual. And as long as you're quite happy with who you are. Rose has brought this up as well, quite eloquently, which is it's important to be true to your values and not compromise on that, and not do it just for partners. Which Sujit has brought up as well. Don't do it because you feel like you have to. I mean, it's common. I will acknowledge that I felt the pressure at first as well to do this. And I'm sure all of us did. So I kind of want to have a conversation about the dating culture and those experiences, because I think a lot of that influences the kind of decisions we make about sexual activities we want to engage in. Sujit, I'll kick the question off with you about, what's been your experience like in the whole dating scene in Australia? If you want to accept that you've dated people, if not, what has your friends' experiences been like? And what should we keep an eye about? What are some things that international students should realize it's not their fault, it's just a cultural thing we have to approach?
Right, so I'll answer those two parts of your question. So for me, dating in Sydney was interesting because, I met people from many different backgrounds and life histories. Some of my closest friends that I've met are from dating websites, and they've become my support network. I can't imagine life in Sydney without them. Dating here is worlds apart from dating where I grew up in Singapore. In Singapore, I grew up not liking the way I looked and always apologized for being who I was because I was brown and skinny and awkward and queer. So I thought that was normal, right? So you try your best to look like the norm and behave like the norm and so on. But moving here, and before this, I was in the US, just moving abroad in general, I was surprised by how many people were interested in getting to know me. They were curious, they were interested, they were often kind. But it's interesting that my international friends and my international student and expat friends share a lot of the same opinions as I compared to me. And I say this with a lot of warmth and love. As thoughtful and generous as they can be, Australian men tend not to be very direct. They can come off as quite passive-aggressive, which can be deeply frustrating if you're someone who appreciates candor. They can also be very vanilla, tend to have a set traditional idea about what it means to date. They need a lot of reassurance. There's this binary view of dating where you either commit to getting in a relationship or just meet to hook up, nothing in between. and they take rejection very personally. I also learned never to bring up issues of race and would change topics quickly if they brought it up, because I found they weren't equipped, and this is not a fault of their own, to have conversations about it. And I would always end up feeling exhausted because they wanted to show me that they were on the right side. And I was like, can we just try to enjoy the moment? And this included Asian Australian men. It could be challenging interacting with them because they would get defensive if I spoke about lateral racism within the gay community, which means Asian on Asian racism and so on, and also racism that I experienced in Singapore. And they would say, look, no, that's not a thing, because in Australia we are also kind of like attacked. And I'm like, yeah, but all of us are in this together, and we could just talk about these things and acknowledge that and move forward. So while my experience here has made me much more assertive about my needs and boundaries, I also find myself just going along with things that, people say and not sharing my honest opinion, because it's just easier that way. Because if they don't really want an honest option, why should I rock the boat and give one? So I pick my battles. But the one area that I do not make any exception is sort of just saying, hey, this is from the get-go, this is what I'm willing to do. This is who I am. At first, I would sort of like be shy about talking about what my wants are, but now I'm just like, look, I'm just going to put it all out on the table. If this is what you like, feel free to talk to me. If not, I completely understand. And I think a part of that has to do with age as well. You grow a thicker skin, you're more confident of your own self-worth, and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Thank you. That is really helpful. And a lot of good, lessons there, that it's perfectly reasonable and okay to be, insecure about yourself. We all go through that learning process, but it's important to respect what is important to you and your own self. So set those boundaries early on, and let people know. I find it quite interesting. Those are your experiences, because I've had either the opposite or very dissimilar experiences, Sujit. So I'm quite, interested in hearing what Sithu has to say about this space, especially what were your dating experiences like?
I was quite interested in hearing that Sujat had very positive experiences here, because for me, dating, finding someone to go on dates in real life is very hard. Just meeting anyone organically is very hard, and on dating apps as well, it's quite hard to get matches as well, which I feel like is that many white girls are not really interested in Asian men. Dating itself is hard, but as an Asian man, it's just kind of at the bottom of the list, I feel like it. And there's sometimes, as Neonica mentioned, of casual racism and stuff as well. That happens. For instance, I have a photo of me and my friends in scrubs on my profile, and then someone was like, "Oh, you look Filipino," which I'm not, which I'm fine with, but "Oh, you look quite Filipino, and that you're wearing a scrub, you must be a nurse," which sounds not too bad, but just stereotyping is very common, and just Asian men are just seen less masculine, and which I just feel like is mainly how the media portrays us, which really sets people's subconscious mind, I guess.
Thank you. Special shout out to all of our supporters. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I hear that. I think it would be interesting to sort of explore this with Rose and Sylvester. A common theme I picked up is that race or prejudice or stereotypical notions and assumptions about people's backgrounds play a heavy influence in your dating culture. Or even the quantification of your success on a dating app, right? And it isn't necessarily an indicator of who you are as a person and whether you're nice. It's just, it comes from the angle of casual racism. And I think that's something that we do need to acknowledge, that as international students, you shouldn't let this be a reflecting indicator of your ability to date or be sexually active or be found attractive by other people. But it's just how the culture is here in Australia. Sylvester, I'm curious to hear about this from you. We've heard that Sithu and Sujit have had very casually racist experiences in the dating space, and you're married and you moved here. what was the perception people had about, you moving here as a married person? What were the interesting conversations you had to have, or the uncomfortable questions you got asked?
I should say it was quite difficult staying without my family for about 16 months. And then to also quickly mention how lucky I was, because I sort of sneaked into Nigeria December 25th, 2019, and then we were back in Sydney January 3rd, and then COVID came and everywhere got locked up. It would have been very difficult for me if we didn't take that move. And then that said, I have been in relationships with people in Sydney, females, and then it is important to stress that aspect that every relationship is not about sex. Sex could be an element, but every relationship is not about sex. When you're in a relationship with a person, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are having sexual intercourse. But one thing I would stress that other panelists have also mentioned is about value. It's about what you want. There are people that want just sex, and there are some people that want long-term relationship. I mean, platonic relationship, just friendship. So I have been in a whole lot of that. And then talking about racism, one thing we cannot run away from is in every multicultural, multiracial society, there will always be elements of racism. And then when I'm at the butt of any of those, I don't feel bad. I don't see the person, the aggressor, as an enemy. I only see the person as a symptom of a society that we must rework. So if I am to answer your question, carrying a band, a wedding band, does not stop me from making relationship with people, with girls, both those that are from my background and those that are not. And then, as I said, it's just about what you want, what your value is, what you want from that relationship, whatever it is up to you. One thing is, do not feel judged, because having sex or not having sex does not make you less human. I will keep repeating that. One thing that is important is keeping yourself and your community safe by doing or practicing safer sex if you must have sex.
Thank you. That is really helpful. I think before we do jump on towards questions that the lovely audience might have raised for us, it's important to sort of understand and recap everything we've discussed, which is sex ed, sex experiences. They don't look the same for any of us. They might be different. The confusion is quite common, but you do have the International Hub now that will guide you in how to get that information. And that information initially would have been Friends or Google, which is not accurate. So it's always important to go to, resources that are accurate. But whatever you choose to do, which is whether it's everything or nothing from a sexual relationship perspective, your choices are valid as long, and that your choices should also be consensual. And it's important that you stick by your values and sort of explore what you want as well. I think as international students, we also go towards the angle of protection, I guess. Protection of both our emotions, but also our sexual safety as well. And I'd love to explore that with all of you. How did you sort of protect yourself or grow in that area? Whereas my question is to you, how do you protect yourself emotionally as an international student when dating, but also sexually as well? What does protection mean for us? Rose, I'll kick the question off with you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just the chat It's so lively. I'm just reading it. Sorry. Can I hear your question again, please?
Yeah, absolutely. At least it's better than me not saying you're on mute. We've avoided that the entire panel, so kudos to us. My question was, international students have to explore protection as well, because we go through so many vulnerable experiences. What suggestions, what insights would you have on protecting ourselves emotionally, given this roller coaster of experiences we have as international students, but also sexually, how do we protect ourselves?
Thank you very much for that. So if I could give an advice to my 16-year-old self, choose your contraception very wisely. The reason why, so pretty much I had to lie to my parents that I already had sex when I was 16. And the reason why they found out was because they discovered my birth control pills. Now, if you don't want your parents to discover your birth control pills, I guess at least I'm speaking to women at this age who have ovaries, who can have hormonal contraception. I recommend either the IUD or the which is an intrauterine device, or you can have also an implant, which can be inserted to your I guess benefits of that. They have very high rates of efficacy, and also you don't have to need the day-to-day, I guess, reminders of having to take the birth control pills. Obviously, it's very important to talk to your healthcare providers and get validated advice. But the number one benefit of that is your parents will discover your secrets. So I would definitely take on that chance if I knew a lot about that more. They do have some side effects, so definitely, again, please talk to your healthcare providers. Now, to protect yourself emotionally, I would say it's I think I really felt what Sylvester said earlier, that not all relationships have to be sexual relationships, and it's important to when you go to Australia as an international student to have, again, establish a support network. So I think the prime example for me was when I broke up with my first boyfriend. Like, his friends were so supportive of me, even though we had broken up. And like, my friends at the time were the ones who really helped me. And I get to be like a social normal person again, even though part of my relationship has ended. It doesn't mean that your other relationships have to forego or have to end up as well. So in summary, talk to your healthcare provider about different contraception options, and to have a good support network that extends just your sexual partner, and have a good friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Sujit, what would you say for this question? How do we protect ourselves, both emotionally and sexually?
So I think being in Sydney, we have lots of spaces where we can get information as to how we can do that, get tested for free. Many clinics are open, and it's quick, anonymous, free testing, even for those on international visas. Also, I think, just make sure that you recognize and honor yourself in the process. Like lovers come and go, but it's important that you have a friend network. So keep investing in your friendships, keep investing in your interests, because those are the things that tend to stay. And it's important to know that your identity is not tied to someone else, because both, if you're in a partnership or whatever it is, you're both growing together, you're still two individual people, right? And if you sense a red flag, if you feel your relationship is a constant struggle, if you're constantly fighting and so on and so forth, there's this romanticizing of the struggle, of sacrifice. And especially for younger, students that I've worked with, they wouldn't be able to see that it's actually toxic because their grades are suffering, the relationship with their parents are suffering, and so on and so forth. Please talk to someone. There's free counseling services. And yeah, I see I need to wrap up in 30 seconds. So yeah, those are my quick tips.
Thank you. Sita, what would you say quite quickly to people wanting to get sexy behind closed doors?
Yep, as Rose and Sujit mentioned, contraceptives, and then getting protected against STIs and also against pregnancy as well. And also just to have clear communications from the start of any kind of relationship and setting those boundaries.
Perfect. Thank you. Sylvester, do you have anything to add to this?
I'll be as fast as I could. Sexual and reproductive health in Australia seems to be modeled after largely tilted towards contraception, preventing pregnancy, which is good. But there is still another aspect that might concern international students more, and that is STIs, bloodborne viruses. And if an international student intends to go back after studying, then the goal should be to go back safe. Don't ever think that it is not possible to contract infections in Australia. It is very possible. So if you must have sex, it must be safe. It must not be coerced. And then you should carry your condoms around. A friend of mine once mentioned that it's like a raincoat. You don't know when it will rain. So you just have to go around with it. And then if it does start raining, you know you won't get wet. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that wraps up the discussion very beautifully. So get tested, protect yourselves with contraception, look out for your friends as well. Remember that, dating is not about you alone. It's cultural context as well. What you choose to do is your choice. Consent is important. Consent is the sexiest thing that you take away from this conversation as well. Self-love and self-care is what's important. But having said that, it's also crucial that you check out the International Student Hub. That's where all of the information and resources are available. Get tested frequently. It's free across Sydney. Having said that, make sure that you are safe. Protection is important. And we've had a lot of questions from people in the audience. Do something that would align with your values, but also would not compromise your safety. So if you go back home and if you're choosing to engage in sexual practices or any sexual activity, make sure that your safety is not compromised. Safety is what's important. Consent is what's important. But thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. We obviously could not be here without our our platinum sponsors, Frenchie. So we really want to thank them again. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We've absolutely had a blast having this conversation. Thank you. Have a good evening.